imai, mahalo papa ololokahi, mahalo People's Fund. Let's get right to it. What are people's favorite memories of my papa and your uncle Kekuni? Shall we start with Sheri?
And mahalo, Velina mai kako, and on behalf of Papa Ololokahi, I'm just so humbled to be sitting on a panel with just amazing people, Joann, Dr. Emira Luli, Keawe, and you, Nālani. So, and Laulani, mahalo again. I think for us at Papa Ololokahi, I think I'm one of those missed generations, I guess, where I didn't have the opportunity, like many people, to have Kekuni memories and stories. But I get it, and I get to live it through the stories I hear from people. The mana'o I hear from Kim or from Joann or Keawe about that influence Kekuni had on so many people on our lāhui. And I think for myself and maybe the generation behind me, how do we provide that continuation of his legacy of, I look at it as a practitioner, Mike, that he provided a lineage for us. It's kind of like telling our mo'okuauhao of, I'm part of this very elite group of people that the only thing I regret is I don't have those memories, those tangible memories. But I think the kuleana of what we have to do is still there. Imai talked about that this is a lifestyle. So, Thursday nights, from what I gather from people, was a lifestyle. You went and you partaked and you learned and you took to give it forward, to pay it back, to be part of this rebuilding of our nation. And I think that's the contribution, right, that continues, that's going to continue. Then that's what Kekuni's memories, his legacy is going to do, is continue well beyond my time here on earth in this honua, right? That it's just going to continue. And I think that's what I get from it. I listened last week and I was just so inspired and almost nervous that, when you have to hapai kuleana like Hawaiian Health, how do you do it in a way that you uphold that belief that he had? And it wasn't just talk, he lived it. He put forward what he wanted us or our nation to be, and he lived by example. And so, it's exciting times, but it's also nervous times, because how do we as Kanaka come together, especially around health, and how do we uplift each other and not bring each other down? And I think when we get into those moments, stopping to think about, hey, what's the legacy? What's our genealogy? What's our mo'okuauhao? What's our lineage? And it's like your own kupuna, right? And that's how I see Kekuni. He's like my hanai kupuna, that I want to make him proud, even though I may have not known him. I know people around me do, and that's just as important. Yeah. So, I'm so excited to kick it off, and I'm sure everyone has so much more mana'o to share. So.
Mahalo, Sheri. One of the things you said that struck with me is that I never heard him say anything negative about anyone. To him, we were all a lāhui and we all worked together. And seriously, I lived with him and never a word. He believed there was a place for everybody in the lāhui and that we all worked together and lifted each other up. Joann, I know that you knew Papa probably better than anyone else.
I was his girlfriend.
Yes, I was going to say that, but I thought maybe I know.
Thank you. And Nālani called me and asked me to do this. I'm like, no, I don't want to do it, because so much to know and so much to remember, and you just feel like you've never worked hard enough. His bar was high and he taught us so much. But I do have a story. I wanted to show this slide. Kekuni always honi in the beginning, and once you got into his orbit, you were in the circle. And once you were in the circle, there was work to do, and it was always fun. But, it was personal. It was always personal. It was always high touch. It was always, so much aloha. But I have this story. I had so many, but I picked this one because, Imai, this is dedicated to you. And Laulani, I hear you're another activist, but, you had a special heart for place in his heart for activists. But one of the things Kekuni was such a master at doing was he would just level the playing field. I don't care if you were sitting with Senator Inouye or dignitaries from, you know, other countries, or you were in Washington, but he did it in such a natural way. Call me Kekuni. Always took our pictures. You know, if you were in town, he'd take you for a ride in his Volkswagen. But, and always the pictures, Nino Aka, right? But I was sitting with him at a conference once, and it was kind of it was about 300 people. And Kim, you might remember this. It was at the East West Center. And it was a time when they had invited people from Aotearoa to share education models. And there was so much discussion about the poor self-esteem of Hawaiian kids and the poor self-esteem and all the impact of that. And somebody in the audience, another activist, had just had enough. And she just got up and she let loose. And she did not have kind words for the host. She did not have kind words for the guests. She just went on, and I was sitting next to Kekuni, and most of us were just kind of like, oh my gosh, you know, we didn't know what to do. And Nālani, your dad, leans over and he looks me in the eye and he goes, well, she doesn't seem to have a self-esteem problem, does she? And I said, no, she doesn't. And we actually had lunch with her later. And it reminded me that he was always so open-hearted and open-minded, you know, for new things. And he just pressed her with a lot of questions. And that was something he always did. But, you know, he has a great spot in his heart for you activists, definitely.
Well, that leads into Laulani.
Need to unmute, Laulani.
Kalamai. Aloha. First of all, Nālani, I wish that I had a little more time on my way home, because as I was coming through Kaneʻohe to come home, Sister Anoinui Punua made this beautiful lei that I would have loved to run back to you, but this is for you and for Kekuni, okay? So I just wanted to have that here. I think, you know, there are so many memories that it's very hard to just say any one, but I think that the most important thing is what was said earlier by Sheri and by Kule, that Kekuni's main focus was sovereignty and health. And very specifically, he wanted complete and total freedom from the United States of America. There was no qualms about it. He, as a researcher, as a scientist, he firmly believed that we can never be fully healthy. We can never regain our health without our full and total independence. And in order to gain that full and total independence, we need to be healthy, because we'll never get there unless we rebuild the health of our people. So, you know, and that goes for physical, mental, spiritual. And so in doing that, right, a lot of people could easily get stuck in, well, you know, if we don't have this, then how can we do that? But he found ways to build from the bottom up, you know, to build air as part of Ola. And that is really, truly his legacy that I know, at the work that I do my best to carry on as much as I can. In a memory, gosh, there's so many memories. I think that one of the things that really always struck me about Kekuni's technique, his battle strategy, was the way in which he used genuine aloha, you know, and not to say that he used aloha like, you know, something that you would manipulate. No, he just emanated true and full aloha that would just encompass whatever the problem was and, you know, set it where it needed to be. You know, so, you know, one quick memory that I have is, and this is a sovereignty memory, but it was, there was a standoff in 1992 between the nation of Hawaii folks and the DLNR, who had revoked the permit at the last moment for the gathering there and told everybody they had to leave or they'd be arrested. And so it was very tense, very harsh, you know, and Kekuni got on the mic and he just, you would think that it was an awesome party, you know, āina, because he was just so happy and full of aloha, and that helped to calm everybody down. And then he saw Bill Patey, who was the director of DLNR nearby, and he just gave him the biggest aloha, you know, aloha, oh, William Patey is here from the Department of Land and Natural Resources, you know, and he called him up, you know, and as he's reluctantly coming on the stage, Kekuni says, oh, Mr. Patey is the great-great-grandson of, and it turned out that he has this genealogy to, you know, I forget his name, but the guy who brought the queen the flowers in, you know, wrapped in a newspaper, you know that story? So he starts telling the whole story while he's bringing William Patey onto the stage, and he says, and here he is now, Pa'i Lima for Mr. William Patey, who is going to restore our air, you know, and so here's this, the poor guy was on the spot, right? Because he was sent there to basically tell us we're all going to be arrested. But, you know, Kekuni managed to put him on the spot. So he was like on the microphone going, I don't know what to say, Kekuni. You know, and of course, everybody is following Kekuni, you know, who's like leading everybody in cheers and aloha and stuff like that. So anyway, I'm just illustrating the way that Kekuni's aloha was an uncompromising force of air also, you know, and a beautiful force of making things pono. And this is how we as young people learned to huli, heva, without hate, without, you know, bitterness. I won't say without anger, because Kekuni could be very angry in a very beautiful and righteous way, but in a way that embraced pono, that encompassed and held that light of pono very, very bright and strong, and emanated aloha, which gave rise to air, to feed the ola of the people, and to really restore us in the way of our spirit, our connection to the āina. So that's my story. Mahalo.
Laulani, that's beautiful. Everyone, Laulani is known to us and loved by us as a peace warrior, practitioner of Hawaiian healing traditions, doula, mother, artist, musician, and community activist, engaged in struggles around Hawaiian sovereignty, demilitarization, aloha āina, and peace movements. Thank you, Laulani. Finally, we'd love to hear from Joseph Keaweʻaimoku Kaholokula, Professor and Chair of Native Hawaiian Health at JABSOM, and a researcher and clinical psychologist by profession. He's also a member of Halimua Kuali'i, and he says a fan of Papa Kekuni. Keawe?
Mahalo, Nālani. Not often that someone introduces me by my full name. Thought I was gonna get scoldings for a while there. I'm really honored to be amongst all of you because I guess minus Sheri, most of you, all of you knew Kekuni far longer than I have. And my memory of meeting Kekuni, or actually knowing Kekuni, goes back to the mid-90s. And I just wanted to share, I actually was able to find some of the original articles he had written back in the 80s and 90s that turned me on to Native Hawaiian health back when I was an undergrad. And Kamanawa and I, read all of his work, would draw upon his work for our work in addressing Native Hawaiian health. So when I think of Kekuni, to me, he is the father of modern Native Hawaiian health. He actually has defined Native Hawaiian health for us. And I say that because, one of Kekuni was ahead of his time. In these articles, and I reread them today, I need to refresh my memory, it was so long. But, he was talking about social determinants of health before the term was really popular. He was talking about historical and cultural trauma before people were even using that term. This is back in the 80s and 90s, things that we didn't start learning till late 90s and 2000s. So he was really ahead of his time. What was unique about Kekuni, and I loved about Kekuni, and as all of you shared, the guy had so much aloha. And, everyone was special to him and he made everyone feel special. And I'll actually end with a story about that since that's kind of the theme. But I just want to focus in on what he means to Native Hawaiian health. Because a lot of the people probably listening in might either be too young or not realize this. And I know Joann and Emmett can certainly share more than I could ever share. But from my perspective, he has really helped to build the current and future generation of Native Hawaiian health, not just in medicine, because as Nālani pointed out, I'm a clinical psychologist, but because his perspective was so broad in health, and he drew upon culture, he drew upon social issues, he drew upon everything and sovereignty, it really drew in many of us into this idea that health is more than biology, health is more than genetics, health is more than just lifestyle choices, right? He was really talking about all this. And again, at a time where people didn't fully understand this, but he did. And, every gathering, and I've been to many gatherings with him. I was fortunate that our Department of Native Hawaiian Health, which Kekuni had a strong hand in founding, he was actually housed in our department as emeritus, even though he was actually the first, and not much people know this. It was a Native Hawaiian, Kekuni, that was the first chair of medicine, the first department when JABSOM first started in the 70s. He came back and he helped to start the medical school. So Kekuni is more than just, we owe a lot to him, not just from the Hawaiian community, but the medical community as well here in Hawaii, because he did that for us. And he really had a strong hand in the starting of the Department of Native Hawaiian Health in 2003, roughly. But even before that, Kekuni has been instrumental. He has been in every movement to advance Native Hawaiian health, whether it was with the Eola Mau report back in the 80s and advocating, I believe, along with Emmett and Joann and others here, to ensure that we had attention and federal support to uplift our health status as a people. He has always been at the forefront of every single thing, every single movement, and I've always appreciated that about Kekuni. But let me come back to the story of Kekuni and not just how much aloha he had, but what a great memory this guy had. So I met Papa Ololokahi in the conference room there, and I'm sitting next to this woman. We're waiting for Kekuni to arrive. And I can't remember what the meeting was about. It was just a meeting that a bunch of people were attending, talking about Native Hawaiian health. And I didn't know this woman. She's sitting next to me, and she kept going on and on about how excited she was to see Dr. Blaisdell. And she said, well, I don't think he'll remember me. It was so long ago that he probably won't remember me, but I'm so excited to see him. So I turned to her and I said, well, I think he might remember you. She said, no, he won't remember me. I'm at a function, it was many people. I go, okay. Kekuni walks in, he makes his rounds, honies everyone. He sees her, He embraces her. He says her name. Then he asks how her parents were doing and says their name. And then she turns to me and she goes, he remembers me. I said, of course, but that's Kekuni. He made everyone feel special. He remembered people that he met, and he really liked to be around people and others. And I'll end my story with a special day with Kekuni. And this is the special day with Kekuni for us. Went to Kaniakapupu. This is just after I started working in the department, early 2005. We took a huaka'i. Kekuni really wanted us to make sure that we stay connected. And he said, let's go for a hike. So we left work. We went up to Kaniakapupu. And he was ahead of us the entire hike. That's how strong this guy was. And he kept telling us, hurry up. But anyway, I'll end there for now and just say I do miss him tremendously.
Mahalo Keawe. Couple things you brought up. One is also instrumental in starting the Department of Native Hawaiian Health. We want to remember Dr. Ben Young, Dr. Nālani Andrade, and Dr. Marjorie Mao. And also whenever we mention Papa Ololokahi, we want to remember everyone who was on the team, or Papa would want us to remember everyone who was on the Aola Mao team, including Dr. Andrade, Dr. Claire Hughes, and Joann, I'm sure there were a dozen of you. So Papa was always very mindful to include everybody else who had played a role. Let's go back to Dr. Sheri Daniels. Our next question is, Dr. Daniels, given that your memory of Papa Kekuni had to do with mentoring and starting a mo'oku aloha, how does Papa Ololokahi plan to carry those values forward? And everyone, Dr. Daniels is Executive Director of Papa Ololokahi. She has more than 20 years experience in social service programs in both private and public sectors in Hawaii. She's a wife and mother of 4 and an advocate for Hawaiian language education. Dr. Daniels?
You know, I think several people said this. I think Laulani said it, that, you know, Kekuni, and everybody talks about his aloha. That's what we hear tonight, is just his aloha. But not only that, but about his ability to just make things pono. And I think we are in a time, not just now, but as Kanaka, just the things we gotta continually push on and advocate for and be strong about. I think at Papa Ololokahi, we recognize, as Keawe said, that health is not just about the kino and about the physical, that it's all the spiritual, it's all the emotional, it's all of those packages. And that I think for us, our kuleana is to make sure that when we're at the table in places where nobody looks like us, nobody talks like us, that we continue to push our voice forward. Because it's at Papa and in other Native Hawaiian organizations that Kekuni helped to birth and to watch blossom, right? Our kuleana is moving that belief forward and making sure we don't forget where we come from, who we are, what our responsibility is, not only to ourselves and the immediate, right, but what we represent for our kupuna, the ones who paved the way, and for the next generations, you know, not even my mo'opuna, but theirs and the generations further, that when I sit around the table in different meetings, I have learned in my role that I can be very unapologetic to advocate for Hawaiians. That is our kuleana at Papa Ololokahi, is we target our Native Hawaiians. Yes, we understand it's community and everyone, because we live amongst it, but if we don't forget our own, then we never going to move forward. And so I think that's really what we're trying to do, is reposition and right the ship, so that, you know, we're pushing, but we're doing it from a place of uncompromising. Yeah, right. And I think we said that aloha, and there's times where we just we give up. We just throw them down and get in the parking lot and troll, but we cannot, because at the end of the day, we get way more riding on it than there's too much at stake. There's been too much work put forth for us that we cannot. And so I think, you know, at Papa, and even I think as a Hawaiian, that if I don't remember what I stand for, it's in myself, but also as a lāhui, then poho, I stay in this job. Yeah. And so I'm always reminded that I may not always agree. I may not always have the same understanding and beliefs as somebody else, another Kanaka. But if our goal, if our outcome is to raise our people's health, then, okay, we're going to figure out a way to work together. And I think that's what we got to remember is through whatever kind pilikia, whatever kind stuff, at the end of the day, if we're in the same boat to get to the same place, I don't care if you're going to swim there, I'm going to drive there, you're going to walk there, we're going to get there. And we got to make sure we're keeping out and looking out for each other, because it's so easy to get distracted and you know, get stuck with the smoke and mirrors. Easy. And it's easy to get upset with each other, and it's all of that stuff is so easy to do. But what I hear constantly about Kekuni is that all of that never mattered, right? All of that didn't matter. It's what is it that we're going to do to uplift our people? And I think that's the direction POL is going. Not easy. We're not going to make everybody happy, but maybe there's a opportunity in that. And I think that's what Kekuni looked at, right? It's like Laulani started about, you know, welcoming this person on the stage. He could have easily gone another direction, but he chose to just go, you know what? I'm going to take the higher road. I'm going to embrace them. I'm going to bring them on, because that's what our people are. We're resilient. We're amazing. We're all these wonderful things. Yeah, people say we're sick and we get all these problems, but you know what? We don't need to continue that belief, yeah, that we actually are really strong. And I think that's what we want to preserve in how we move forward in understanding our history and what our kuleana is as POL and as the Native Hawaiian Health Board. So.
Oh, mahalo.
Mahalo.
Joann Tsark is co-director of the Community Engaged Research Core of Ola Hawaii at the University of Hawaii. Joann is a wife and mother, and formerly the research director at Papaololokahi, where she established Imihale, the Native Hawaiian Cancer Network. Joann,
Yes.
you've known Papa since probably, I was remembering in the 1970s, the Hawaiian language was not spoken anywhere. There were no punana leo. It was barely taught at the University of Hawaii, and Papa was appointed along with Tutameri Kavena Pukui to the Committee for the Preservation of Hawaiian Language, Art, and Culture. He was also a part of the community before we had a school, a Native Hawaiian school at the University of Hawaii. So Joann, how do you feel that Papa Kekuni's legacy would be carried forward in your work?
Sure. You know, I particularly wanted to concentrate a little bit on Kekuni's role as a researcher. I mean, there's so many things about him in all sectors. I don't know how he covered so much territory, but he really did. And I'm glad that, you know, Emmett is with us tonight. He was on the first program, but I'm glad he's here because I wanted to talk about his role in research. So, you know, when I came into the scene, it was all about what we didn't have. We didn't have enough researchers. We didn't have any publications. We didn't own this. We didn't control that. So there was a lot of deficit. But Kekuni acknowledged that. And if you really look at his writings, some I shared with you last week, Nālani, he left us these sort of historical roadmaps. So one, he laid down the facts about the historical picture, but he always had recommendations and he always had a plan of action. And he always made us, and Imai said this twice already, last week and this week, he had the ability to embrace us and make us accept our role and our kuleana in that. It was not something he was going to do alone. It was something that we all had to do. And one thing I always appreciate about Kekuni, which was the fun part, is as expert as he was in a lot of things, he was such a good learner. He loved to meet new people. He loved to hear about new stuff. And, you know, so all the meetings we had about trying to get the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Act passed, and again, looking at the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Improvement Act and looking at the assessments that were done, it looked at the deficit. And what Kekuni was so gifted at doing was really instilling a lot of optimism and hope, at least for me as a young public health professional at the time, that we have to do it. We have to figure it out. We know it best. We have to trust ourselves to do it. So here I am. I was doing family planning and ended up in cancer and ended up in research, which was not even a title that I even think I've earned today. But I wanted to share, Kim, if you can put up the next slide. And this is just one example. There were so many. Imi Hale, of course, was something I was so much a part of. But I wanted to talk about Molokai, and just because Kekuni's role in that, really spanned about 30 years. And I'm glad Emmett's on, because this was actually even before my time when, studies were going on Molokai, the first heart study. And I know he was part of that. And I had the privilege of, being part of this 30-year movement up until, the third cardiovascular study. But Emmett, maybe just kind of walk us through that timeline and how Kekuni got involved in that. And if you're on mute, take it off mute. So maybe Emmett is not there. So I'm going to continue. And Emmett, if you're there, join in when you can patch in. So, we had heard about the things like the Molokai heart study that was followed by the diet study. And those of you I know on the call know the impact of these studies and what it then helped to propagate and form. And all those other little boxes that are not in red are all some of the policy things and movements. And I'm not covering the things, Imai and Laulani, that you know about that was happening on the environment side and water rights and land rights. This is just in health. And he made us feel like if we weren't going to do this, nobody was going to do it for us. And if we didn't publish our own information, we're going to always be at the mercy of publishing what other people said about us when it was not our lived experience and it was not the solutions that we knew would work in our community. And also, it was things that did not create opportunities in our Hawaiian community. So Kekuni was just such a great supporter, and he brought his expertise. I knew him more as a person before I realized what he's a hematologist, what he worked on nuclear, impact things in Japan. And that was so helpful to me in my work in the Pacific because of the nuclear free Pacific stuff and the things and the aftermath of nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands. So he was just such a great resource for that. But I think what I want to impress upon people is not just his acumen in research and his inquisitiveness. I mean, just, if we had a question, he'd add another question. Why not? How come? What do we think? Who should we talk to? Kekuni dragged me around. I shouldn't say drag me. I willingly jumped in that Volkswagen because a meeting with Kekuni and somebody else was always such an enriching experience. He was so inquisitive. He would, if we didn't know the answer to a question, he would say, well, let's go talk to Dr. C at, Hawaii Medical Center. Let's go talk to, someone else, or let's talk to Ben Young. And what he did was he just kept casting the net wider and wider. So in the area of research, we ended up having a team. And it wasn't just people who were educated researchers. The community people were just as, if not more important in the research process. He would sit with Auntie Jane. He would sit with her husband, talk about Pa'akiki. And so he included everyone because we couldn't answer or solve anything unless we got everybody's opinion. But the one thing I want to leave you with this research is that Kekuni was there every step of the way. I mean, from the beginning, riding the plane, the four-seaters, gosh, sometimes I remember he got a big thing on his head because, you had to get in the plane and the pilot would tell you when to close the door. But the thing about Kekuni is he came to every single meeting. I don't know how he kept his medical practice, but I know he did. And he wasn't one who was always on his cell phone and got interrupted. He just gave you his full attention. He didn't talk much, But when he did, we all listened. And the other thing is Kekuni and Emmett's the same way. The meeting didn't end until everybody picked up a broom, swept up, washed dishes, and he was part of all of that. And, you know, it just made his involvement just so real and so genuine. And I always appreciate it. And, you know, Sheri, I know you didn't have a lot of time with Kekuni. I feel so fortunate to have had that. I'm a little bit, I have a Marshallese gal staying with me now, and I know he would just have the best conversations with her, you know, and she won't have that. So it is our kuleana to share the kinds of things he shared with us and to expose. The next couple of pictures, and Emmett, if you will unmute yourself, I'll let you talk about it, but I'm gonna start. Just to so that you can see the before, 1985 was when they did the first heart study on Molokai. So Emmett had dark hair, so did Kekuni. And then in 1991, one of the outcomes of that study was the Native Hawaiian healthcare systems. The heart study data was one of the first information and data that we could put into legislation that was specific to Native Hawaiians. And then, and you can see people like Helen O'Connor and Jane Lee and Billy Akutagawa and Noelani Joy. The next picture brings it even more current because that same group sort of stayed together and added a few others, including Kekuni was always there, and went to the third study, the Huakanawa Kaliko, and a generational study on heart disease. So, you know, this is a group that hung together, and I'll tell you, Kekuni was really the glue, and Emmett the leader, of course, but it just was his inspiration and his motivation to tell us that we could, maybe we couldn't do everything, but if we didn't do it, who would? And so, you know, there really, it was heavy kuleana, but always fun to do it with him.
Dr. Aluli, are you there?
I'm here
Yeah.
as an invited guest, but go on, Joann.
No, it's your turn, and please keep mind of the time. I want to make sure everybody has a chance to talk.
All I'm saying is you know, Kekuni was so involved in our studies on Molokai, from the Molokai Heart Study in 1985 to our OKI, the Molokai Diet Study, to our Huakanawa Kaliko. He was always there, and he involved all the kauka of our generation and the next generation to get involved. And so that's my thing about Kekui. He was so there for all of us, encouraging us and supporting us, and oh, I don't know anybody else could do better than him. And we huakaid to Kalopapa and to kind of like Ko'olave and to Mauna Kea, all on his kind of like encouragement to kind of like get us kauka involved, like on Molokai, in the issues that make a difference for us. And then he went on and on before all of us could catch up with him. That's Kekuni.
And I just, oh, sorry, Emmett. I also wanted to add that, you know, grants looked very different until we wrote grants with Kekuni. So he encouraged us to add language. He encouraged us to state our values. I can get money for food in any grant because Kekuni made clear that was important. Right. But the thing was that the grants became our story, and maybe not our funded, but you know what, when they were, it was about us. It was about the locus of control being in the Hawaiian community, and it was our story. And the publications, I'm so glad, you know, he and Emmett co-edited the first journal, and four journals later, you know, Kekuni, you know, we could look at each other and say, wow, now we can quote ourselves. Now we can quote other Hawaiians and not other people always researching us. So, you know, he really changed. I think Keawe, you said he was kind of the leader of modern Hawaiian medicine, but also research. You know, he made it personal, he made it about us, and he made it relevant to us. So always grateful to him for that. And the last two slides real quick, these are things I have used of Kekuni's from the time he put it to paper, his common underlying factors, And the last one everyone will recognize was his population by ethnicity chart. I was looking for the one I first had, which was on an overhead, but I think it decomposed. But you know, my legacy is I'm going to use these slides until I really pack it in. But it was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne, and thank you for those fabulous photos of Kuhio SM and Dr. Clayton Chong and Dr. Gerard Akaka and of course Dr. Aluli. So Laulani, we're back to you. How would you say that Papa's values move forward into your work today and in the future?
Well, definitely Kekuni was definitely the reason that I went into health, you know, and I mean, he literally was the reason because, you know, when I was an undergraduate, I got my undergraduate in video, right, in telecommunications and video production because I was working with Namaka āina guys, and well, not because, but you know, I was doing that side of things, and my grades overall were terrible because I was also in the movement and you know doing way too much multitasking. So I had these rotten grades as an undergraduate and all this, and I had you know this kind of gap where I was really, you know, with Kekuni a lot and others on the front lines. And then somewhere in there, you know, he just made that message very clear that we cannot regain our independence without our health. And at that time, I was just starting to study La'au Lapa'au with Papa Henry Hawai. And I decided to go and get a master's degree, and it was like I totally did not have the grades. I didn't have anything, but Kekuni, with the power of the pen, wrote a letter basically to the department, the School of Public Health, saying that they would be letting me in, and here's why. And it was a very long and really embarrassing letter, but you know, that really went into detail, and and sure enough, they somehow let me in with my rotten grades and everything. You know, being utterly not an academic or anything like that, and from that point on, I was in this world of public health and, you know, in it with Kekuni a lot. And it became such a frontline thing because that was the only way I knew how to do anything, you know. And so before we knew it, you know, I was interning at Papa Ololo Kahi. I was like, you know, doing this kind of, I had some La'au patients that Papa Hawai was helping me with some serious cases from our movement, and Kekuni somehow would end up, you know, we'd end up like arguing over things. Interestingly, he would always argue the traditional medicine viewpoint. You know, you would think that he would be really strong on the doctor thing, but I'd be like, Kekuni, I gotta get bandages for this person, you know, and he'd be like, bandages, you know, and you know, and talk about, you know, ea and spirit and what was actually needed. Next thing you know, the person would be like basically sleeping on his couch and he's in his house, you know, and I was like scrambling up the bandages, you know, and things like that. And so in a very real way, we got to practice that whole interface of ea and health and building health within the movement, and and doing the fight that it takes to have the greater ea for the people, and healing the people who are doing that fight, and and just rolling. And he had such grace and eloquence in the way that he would carry that forward. And so getting to experience that with him, and quite honestly, in some ways being just a real pain in the butt to him a lot of times, I got to learn how to, where kuleana fits in. Everybody's got their own kuleana. Nobody can do everything like anybody else can, but that it takes all of us, and together we need to just do that little piece that's in front of us, that whatever that is, that's right in front of us, and still continue to grow, to kanu that which we need to kanu, and grow, ho'olu the lāhui in a beautiful way through healing and health and good food, which he also taught us in real time, and and love, aloha, in real practice. And I just find that from my time with him, I've internalized those things, and I don't even think about what to do next. I just keep it going. Today I was driving around food to people who, could use the food in our lāhui to kind of have a, kanaka economic stimulus, by eating healthy food. And, tomorrow I'll be doing something else, pushing the UC over TMT. And, there's this whole variety of things. And I think that balancing that variety is a skill that I've learned from Kekuni. And while, I can't do what Kekuni did, I can't even begin to fathom a lot of it. But I'm glad that together we can, that each one of us in our little piece of what we carry forward can do that. And so I guess that's my mission with the work of Kekuni, is just taking those internal lessons that I learned about what it takes to build ea, what it takes to practice real aloha in real time, what it takes to heal, what it takes to grow the lāhui, what it takes to be free. All of those things, they're great lessons that, I was blessed to just learn one little piece of, or, maybe many little pieces of, just like everybody learned these little pieces of. And, now it's a matter of putting them all together in their right places. And, like you would build a fish pond wall, or, build a lo'i kalo, it's just pohaku by pohaku by pohaku. And that's what I've learned is how to choose those good pohaku, how to, how to let those shine in the light of really awesome aloha and healing, and how to holomua.
Thank you, Laulani. It was so beautiful. Thank you. One of the things that Dr. Daniels mentioned, and that Laulani, you touched upon, was he believed everyone in the lāhui had a place. And whether I read Marcus Aurelius or the Bible, what the theme that keeps coming up again and again is that we are all part of the grand work, whoever you believe the grand creator is. Some are the hands, some are the feet, some are the arms, some are the legs. And I think that was really important to Papo. Another thing is everyone was important to him. So many people in the hospitals told me that he treated the janitors and the cooking staff the same way he treated the chief medical officer of any hospital. He knew everybody's name, their children's name, their parents' name, and probably their genealogy. So thank you. Keawe, we've been anxiously awaiting to hear about you and the Department of Native Hawaiian Health. And are you taking photos of everyone after all your meetings?
I don't take as much photos as your papa did, but I have majority of the photos I do have in my office was actually given to me by him because he took them at all the functions. You know, when I'm listening to everyone, and this is so fitting, lāhui hoʻi ea, yeah? He was about ea, Kekuni, and all of its manifestations and all of its multiple meanings. And the thing that I take with me and I try to apply in the work we do at the department and the guidance I provide as the chair really has to do with, you know, after every conference or meeting would ask Kekuni to close. And Kekuni would ask us to gather in a circle, and he would have us hanui loko, hanui waho, right? Deep breaths, inhale, exhale. And he would ask, he would explain the three people, right? That connects us. And he would first start with the fontanelle, or the what becomes the suture in adults, but up here that connects us to our past, our kupuna, our ancestors. And then of course our umbilicus, or our navel area, that connects us to the present, and our genitalia that connects us to the future. And so I always appreciate that, because I like to think of what we do around in the area of Native Hawaiian health is it's a way for us to connect to all three, right? To draw upon our kupuna and our past for the answers that we need, for inspiration, to deal with the things that affect us today, but be mindful of the next 7, 8 generations into the future. And that everything we do should have all of those things in mind, to be sustainable, to be effective, and also to be respectful. So, you know, around us at the department, Kekuni is all around us. I mean, we have an ahu that has his pohaku kihi as one of the 4 corner pohaku for the ahu from his āina, from his place, Nālani, as you know. Kekuni's picture is up there in our office area. Meli makes sure that we have a lot of pictures of Kekuni. And we talk about him often. In fact, we have a slide about our founders, and Kekuni's up there. So, you know, I take all of that with me, and Kekuni is always, to me, like I said, he is the father of modern Native Hawaiian health, whether it's research, whether it's medicine, whether it's anything to do with health. And I think he has really defined the field and area for us and the future generation. And I think that's what we take with us at the department.
Mahalo, Keawe. So out of respect to, I see some amazing people who are also here, Babette Galang, Gail Bonham, Kamakanohokuane Farrar. What we'd like to do is wrap up with a few short words about how, as Papa Kekuni was a mentor to perhaps you, how you might move forward and be a mentor to all or to others. And then if Kim feels there's time, after everyone wraps up in a few minutes, we can have questions. So who would like to start? Oh, we can remain in order. So Dr. Daniels.
Shucks, I was like, oh, maybe I'll get a few seconds to think and hear other people's mana'o. You know, I think it's about the aloha. Everybody's mana'os, mo'olelo, their mana'o tonight was about just what who he was, his presence. And, you know, I think maybe that's what our kuleana, or for me, my hope that I take on in mentoring or moving things forward is to always kind of have that in our head, that as multifaceted as he was, and Joann talked about just all the different parts of Kekuni, and we heard it from Laulani. I mean, just all of that is, how do we even be a 10th of that in the work that we do? And even if we did, like, I'm thinking, wow, if I can just put in a 10th of what he probably just did, like, how much more ahead can we be as a lāhui? And if all of us are doing just that little parts, like Laulani said, like, holy moly, nothing's impossible for us. And I think maybe that's what it is how can I be a better person to reach across the wherever, right? Across the āina, that, you know, it doesn't have to only be us in silos. I don't have to be in a silo. I can reach out to Joann or to Laulani and make it expansive to Keawe or Emmett, right? That there's so much more out there that I don't have to do it alone. So maybe that's what I'm going to take moving forward, is to be a more collective, engaged with the lāhui.
Mahalo.
Mahalo.
And then Uncle Emmett, Dr. Aluli.
This is a tough one. You know, I aspire to be a better person every day because your dad was such a role model. I don't know how he did it. He was so not bothered by the noise and the drama. And he was so accepting and kind of everyone. And as Laulani said, he got angry. I could tell when he was annoyed, but he was gifted in including everybody and making everybody part of the solution. And I think for me in particular, what one of his gifts is that, you know, for him, there was no topic that was off limit. I don't care if we're talking about blood, biospecimens, if we're talking about something very mundane, like the 2 pockets on his aloha shirt, which is why I was his girlfriend, but that story's for another day. You know, just always being open and always being appreciative of new information and always being optimistic that that person he was going to pony and then bring into his orbit was going to contribute something, because I'm not sure how he did it, Nālani, but I was always very secure that he had a plan. And I was always very secure that I had a role there, and that, or he would make a space. And I also knew he would hold us to a high bar. I have more things with his handwriting on it, redlining, you know, papers and grants and stuff. And thank God he had the most beautiful penmanship. I always appreciated that too. But just being open and just optimistic, especially in these times. It's hard because there's so many disheartening messages and times. And I always hear that voice. What would Kekuni do? What would Kekuni do? The one thing he's not going to do anymore is he's not going to call me for publications, which is why for years I kept a list of you know, publications, because he would say, Joann, where is that paper? You know, and I wanted to be available. I never wanted to disappoint him. He was always generous and available for us, always.
Mahalo, Joann. Dr. Aluli?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so Kekuni carried on something that I've learned from the elders here in Molokai, you know, unconditional aloha. And with that unconditional aloha, he was really inspired, you know, when his first class of medical students graduated in 1975, there was only like about less than 11 Hawaiian physicians in practice. And with the work he's done to encourage and inspire and push us Hawaiians, now they're about like 280 Hawaiian physicians. And I really do credit Kekuni's work to produce as many Hawaiian physicians. The kind of like challenge that we have is can we as Hawaiian physicians take better care as a lāhui of our families and communities? And he really taught us how to push forward. And that's my thing about, my love about Kekuni Blaisdell. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Laulani.
Well, I have to say that some of the biggest lessons that that I learned, the pieces that really inspired me are his focus. You know, how he would maintain a focus on what he was going to do, what he was going to accomplish, and even, you know, I mean, sometimes we were dealing with very shaky situations, very unstable situations. You know, we weren't sure if, you know, is everybody all going to get arrested? Is everybody going to, you know, what's going to happen? You know, they were sometimes like borderline kind of dangerous situations, sometimes over the borderline. But he maintained the focus of why he was there, wherever he might be, whether it was a health matter, a sovereignty matter, or, you know, an āina, an aloha āina matter. He maintained his focus. He maintained his grace, and his grace is another thing that, you know, in the way that he carried his aloha forward was with this tremendous and beautiful grace. And so, you know, his focus and his grace are two things that for me are very, very important. And his faith, you know, and I you know, it's like the English word faith is kind of, it doesn't quite cut it. It's more of a knowing. For Kekuni, it was beyond faith. It was just simply, you know, where he was at and what he knew was what he knew. And he was right. When he was in that space of, you know, of determination, you know, that's another thing, of course, his determination was unshakable. And when he was in that space of determination, I will pretty much say he was always right. And some of those things that he was very determined about, in, you know, a long time ago, people thought it was crazy, right? When he would talk about us being occupied by the United States and how the United States needed to leave. People kind of, you know, I mean, a lot of us were just kind of like, yeah, but but a lot of other people in the other worlds that he also was in just didn't want to touch that. And it was very, very important how he was able to remain in these worlds and yet stay absolutely steadfast to the truth. You know, just in the way that the Queen said, you know, he remained absolutely steadfast to the truth and absolutely steadfast to his goals, which were to make Hawaii pono. And the only way to make Hawaii pono is to make Hawaii free and to make Kanaka healthy and strong so that we can achieve that freedom. And there was absolutely no doubt in his methodology, in his focus, in his in what he did. He simply stayed to what he knew was pono, what he knew was right, what he knew was true, what he knew had to happen. And in, you know, that's something that I have very much absorbed from him. He had no doubt, and I have no doubt. And I think that those of us who've been really touched by Kekuni in whatever fashion, you know, have absolutely no doubt that what he said was correct. And even if it takes time to manifest, you know, that it will be, because making pono is based upon the truth. And when, you know, you do the simple math on the truth, there is only, you know, pono becomes very simple. And so those are the things that I got from Kekuni that I try to carry forward, are the simplicity of pono, and along with that steadfast determination, the focus, and the grace of aloha.
That's beautiful, Laulani.
Mahalo. That reminds me that for those who know Papa, and for those who don't, the basic idea of the tie-in to sovereignty and health was that Native Hawaiian people are part of Papa and Wakea, the union of Sky Father and Mother Earth. And everything is living around us, and we are siblings with the āina and haloa. And if we take away that idea of a culture away from a people, then you're causing bodily harm to the people. Sorry. Next. Oh, we're waiting for Keawe to speak, yes?
Sorry, I was enjoying listening. I guess the question is, what do we admire and value the most from Kekuni? You know, between 2005 to roughly, I think 2011, 2012, I had the good fortune of my office being right next door to Kekuni at the medical school. And he was, even though he's retired, he used to come in a lot, especially in the afternoon hours. And so he and I often would leave the building together and walk down to our cars, and he'll be carrying his huge backpack. And every single time I'd offer to carry it for him to his car, he would refuse, and he would carry it himself. And then we would spend a good 15, 20 minutes sometimes out in the parking lot before we got in the cars, just talking. And what I appreciated about Kekuni was every single time he asked about my thoughts. It was always what I thought about something. What was I going to do about that? He made you feel like, wow, you had something to say, and it mattered. So I appreciate that of Kekuni. And so I miss those days, because it did allow me the space to think about things. And as I think it was Joann that said earlier, he would ask a lot of questions. And that was him. He would ask, and I would throw an idea out, and he would ask a question upon that. And I actually enjoyed that very much, because it made me think better, refine my thinking, and he made me think about the other side of the coin often. So I think that graciousness and that relationship and being able to appreciate what others have to say is what I remember of Kekuni.
Thank you so much, Keawe. It's time we wrap up. We'd like to thank Papaololokahi and Kim, and Kalahoʻihoʻiʻea and Imai, and the People's Fund. And as Kamahana says, Papa always taught us to live in love with joy. Remember, great people think about ideas, small people talk about people. And I think when people say that Papa would get angry, I've never seen him angry at a person. If he was ever angry, it was about an idea. So mahalo all for coming. Love you all. And Imai, back to you.
Mahalo, everybody. I just want to say mahalo to all of our panelists tonight for another terrific and not all warming trip down memory lane to remember a very important kanaka, very important man, doctor. I met Kekuni luckily right on the end, right at the beginning of the 2000s. I didn't know he was this big fancy hematologist till years later. When I started to see all these doctors coming around him, and then I finally asked him, years later, hey uncle, what do you do? But I know him through the movement largely. He was somebody who, when I was young and thirsty for activity, thirsty for politics, he was a face that I always would see consistently. And that's something that I always remember about Uncle Kekuni, is his consistency. and through efforts to, involve with engaging in the military, specifically the Striker Brigade and its transformation, is when we finally were able to come to Hale Kaohinani, have several meetings over the course of years and years, working with Dr. Blaisdell, young Kanaka, put in a privileged position in the university to have this time and this space to sort of exercise this gut-wrenching feeling of what we would begin to understand was this oppressive regime, like the state's knee on the proverbial back of the neck. Uncle Kekuni, Dr. Blaisdell, sort of taught us about the history, shared with us the maladies that affected our people. And he was the one who first introduced me to a celebration called Kala Ho'i Ho'i Ea, which by that time he had already been running for several years over at Thomas Square with Laulani and many of you here in attendance throughout the years, and many of the people who are now watching this cast. So in those circumstance that I was able to meet and then become close to Uncle Kekuni. He was somebody who definitely inspired you to be more than what you were. He definitely brought a sense of worth and value to me as a young, impressionable Kanaka who was looking for a positive path to exercise this anger and this frustration about learning about what had happened to our people. But instead, he turned that energy around and he encouraged me to continue to educate. And when he found out that I myself was an educator at Kumu for a young Hawaiian school, I'm very interested and willing to participate in political discourse publicly and engage our students. He was very, very proud, I believe, to have spent some time laying his impression upon me, and I certainly am very grateful to Dr. Blaisdell for inspiring in me and to all of us this sense of ea, and he would be very happy, and he's smiling, that big old smile that we all know at the discussion that we have. And so one of the things that I just want to leave off with, and what I've heard over and over and over again, is if not us, then who? If not now, then when? And Uncle Kekuni knew there was a role for each of us to play. And if we all play our role, and if we all rely on each other, then we can truly gain what is most important for us as a people, which is ea, the deoccupation of our nation, the removal of the American military presence, true economic liberation, true political determination. Those were the la'aulapa'au that would save our people, and they're intertwined. So I'm very appreciative of your messages. It resounds in me, and I'll think about them for quite some time. And so I want to say thank you for this medicine tonight in honor of Uncle Kekuni, just like that apu that he would be the kahuna of, and have these ceremonies in the park, fearless, in his oya i'o. And I think, Laulani, that's what I was thinking when you're making those statements, is he was steadfast and fearless in his oya i'o. He was ahead of his time. He met it with kapu aloha. Right now we're figuring like, oh wow, look at this new thing. No. It's been in front of us this entire time. And so the things that you share about Dr. Blaisdell resound in me as well. And I start to see his physical manifestation, his life, his ea, continue in all of the things that we do, that we say, that we project, that we fiercely, unapologetically hold steadfast to. So mahalo on behalf of Kala Ho'i Ho'i Ea as we carry on the tradition and inspiration of Dr. Kekuni Blaisdell. Mahalo to Papa Ola Lokahi for this wonderful event. We look forward to many more coming up to honor the work of our health field, as well as to honor Dr. Blaisdell. Mahalo again to Hawaii People's Fund And for all of our attendees, wherever you may be, we hope that you are inspired. We hope that you are filled with aloha. We hope that you are ikaika, as Dr. Blaisdell would often say, by our panel tonight. On behalf of everyone here tonight, aloha ahi ahi kako.
Aloha mahalo.